Have you ever noticed yourself doing things you never consciously decided to do, like your hand reaching for the phone before you even admit you're lonely, or smiling in rooms that make you uncomfortable, or staying silent when every part of you wants to speak? It feels like choice, but underneath that illusion, something older, quieter, and far more powerful is at work. That force is your subconscious, the hidden engine behind your life. It's the part of you that breathes when you forget to, that flinches before you know why. It remembers every look, every rejection, every signal of safety or danger. Like a river flowing beneath frozen ground, it keeps moving you forward while your conscious mind walks above, believing it's in control. You think you're deciding who to love, what to fear, and how to live. But many of those choices were written long before you could name them. A pianist's fingers move before thought catches up. A driver reaches home without recalling the turns. The body knows the path, because the mind beneath the mind is steering it. This is the paradox of being human. You are both the captain and the current. You hold the wheel, yet something unseen shapes the course. Neuroscientists estimate that up to 95% of your daily behavior is automatic, guided not by awareness, but by a silent network of memories, habits, and emotional codes embedded deep in your brain. Think about that. Most of who you are was never consciously chosen. It's like walking through a garden you never planted. Each flower is a memory, each thorn a fear. You try to prune the edges to manage what grows, but the roots extend far beyond your reach. That's where the subconscious lives, not as an enemy, but as the keeper of everything you've ever felt. It records what protected you and what caused pain, then builds the rules of your life around those lessons. The subconscious doesn't care about happiness or success. It cares about survival. So you find yourself repeating familiar stories even when they hurt. You chase people who resemble your past. You avoid opportunities that challenge your idea of safety. It whispers, "Better the pain you know than the risk that might destroy you." And the conscious mind agrees, mistaking fear for wisdom. Beneath all the noise of thought, the subconscious remains vast, ancient, and unfinished. It's both guardian and ghost, shaping every moment you live. You may think you're steering your life, but maybe you're only holding the wheel while something deeper guides the way. And if 90% of who you are operates in silence, who or what is really driving your life? Before you ever learned to think, you were already learning to feel. Long before you spoke your first word, the world was teaching you through tone, rhythm, and silence. A glance that lingered too long, a sigh of disapproval, a fleeting smile that made you feel safe. Your subconscious witnessed it all, absorbing, shaping, and constructing the hidden blueprint of who you'd one day become. The air feels heavy, not from words, but from what remains unsaid. A mother's voice cuts sharper today. Her movements are rushed, her attention distant. The child senses something important, not through explanation but through energy. Love, they learn, can disappear without warning. That realization doesn't fade when silence returns. It burrows deep, settling in the subconscious. Years later, as an adult, that same child hesitates to show happiness, fearing it could bring conflict or overcompensates, always trying to please to keep peace intact. Psychologists call this attachment conditioning. The developing brain learns to equate love with safety. Neural pathways strengthen with every repetition. A raised voice becomes danger. A gentle touch becomes security. Research in developmental psychology suggests that by age 7, the subconscious has already recorded most of its core beliefs, not about the world, but about your place in it. Were you protected? Were you seen? Did your emotions matter? Each answer carved a lasting pattern beneath your adult thoughts. Boy praised only for being quiet grows into a man who fears his own voice. A girl who earned affection through perfection becomes a woman who confuses exhaustion with value. These aren't deliberate choices, they're echoes. The subconscious, loyal to your survival, keeps replaying what once kept you safe. It doesn't realize you've grown, that the danger is gone. To it, you're still that child in the dim light, reading faces for warmth, adjusting yourself to avoid storms. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own." He was right. They were shaped by tone, footsteps, the way someone said your name softly or sharply, every reflex, hesitation, or craving is a forgotten lesson repeating itself. You are the sum of invisible teachings written not in words, but in emotion. The subconscious never forgets its first language, feeling, and it still speaks through you, guiding your responses, protecting you from ghosts that no longer exist. But what happens when those childhood rules become the adult's cage? That's when the mask begins to form, the next chapter of your hidden story. You grow up believing you've left the past behind, replaced it with logic and goals. But beneath the layers of adulthood, the child remains, only better disguised. You call it maturity, responsibility, ambition. Often, it's the mask your subconscious created to keep you safe. You wear it well, at work. It looks like control, drive, or the need to prove your worth. In love, it looks like caution, smiling through discomfort, saying I'm fine when you're breaking inside. Your subconscious still doesn't trust the world with your truth. Once, truth brought pain, so it built armor made of habits. The people pleaser who can't say no. The perfectionist who feels safe only in exhaustion. The skeptic who fears closeness because trust once hurt. These masks aren't lies. They're unfinished survival stories. Neuroscience shows that most of your decisions happen before you're even aware of them. The brain, faithful to its past, activates the same neural circuits built in childhood. Familiarity feels like safety, even when it hurts. That's why you find yourself drawn to similar love, familiar arguments, the same ache of being unseen, pain, repeated long enough becomes home. You think you're chasing happiness, but your subconscious only seeks what it recognizes. Picture yourself as a puppet on golden strings. You move gracefully. Believe you're free, but unseen hands still pull. Those strings are woven from old fears and promises once whispered. I will never be a burden. I will never be weak. I will never need too much. The mask keeps you functional, admired, even loved. But it also keeps you distant from yourself. You smile not from joy, but because smiling once prevented pain. You strive not from passion, but because stillness once felt dangerous. Philosophers call this the tragedy of self-forgetting, when the person you've become is just the echo of who you had to be. You cling to control, remembering the chaos you once couldn't manage. But control, too, is just another mask for fear. Then comes a quiet moment when the strings feel tight. Something inside resists, whispering that this performance isn't freedom, it's repetition. And that's where awakening begins. When the puppet senses the strings and asks, what if I'm not the one moving? You start to look beneath the surface, seeing how deeply those patterns are wired into your mind. Not by fate, but by design. We like to think we're fully conscious, that every decision comes from awareness, but research says otherwise. Milliseconds. Before you choose to lift your hand, your brain has already decided. Neuroscientists call it preconscious processing. The body acts before the mind claims. Control. Philosophers once called it fate, written in neurons. Your subconscious isn't abstract, it's ancient. It lives in the brain's oldest regions, the limbic system, where emotion outweighs logic, and the basal ganglia, where habits form and repeat. These parts don't speak in words, they speak in sensation and impulse. Every time you withdraw from a stranger's glare or reach for your usual coffee without thought, that's the subconscious acting, guiding, repeating. Freud pictured it as an iceberg, only a small part visible above water. Jung went deeper, calling it the personal unconscious, a reservoir of forgotten memories and inherited patterns echoing through dreams and coincidences. Modern psychology calls it automatic processing. But the truth remains the same. Our hidden mind still writes much of our story. What we call personality is often just a choreography of past experiences, a network of learned patterns, sensory fragments, and automatic responses. Each day, your brain absorbs countless impressions, yet only a few reach conscious awareness. The rest remain below the surface, quietly shaping how you love, what you fear, and whom you trust. Still, science struggles to measure what the heart already understands. There's no tool delicate enough to capture how a mother's sigh can define safety for a lifetime. No brain scan can explain why the scent of rain recalls someone you've tried to forget. The subconscious speaks in poetry, not equations, and through dreams, slips of the tongue, and that quiet unease that rises when truth draws near. You are both the observer and the observed, exploring your own depths while being molded by them. Knowledge is valuable, but it isn't everything. Trying to understand the subconscious is like charting an ocean from the surface. You can identify the currents, name the tides, but until you dive in, until you feel what moves beneath, you remain at the mercy of its stillness. Because knowing the subconscious is not the same as being aware of it. Awareness is what transforms. It's the moment the mind stops pretending to control and finally begins to listen. But what happens when the mind hides from itself? When the emotions buried deep begin to stir under the floorboards of awareness? You might call it bad luck, coincidence, or self-sabotage. Yet the truth is quieter and more profound. It's the return of what you've refused to feel. The subconscious never forgets. It simply waits. Every unacknowledged fear, every emotion pushed aside becomes part of the shadow that trails behind you, quietly reshaping your choices until you finally turn to face it. You can see it in the recurring tragedies of ordinary life. The person who keeps falling for the same kind of partner, each with a different face but the same ache. The man who fears rejection yet builds walls so high that no one can ever reach him. The woman who longs for peace but thrives in chaos. These patterns aren't random. They're emotional echoes. The subconscious mind's way of replaying an old wound in hopes of finally healing it. Psychology calls this repetition, compulsion. The instinct to re-experience pain until its lesson is understood. But the subconscious doesn't communicate with words. It speaks through patterns, impulses, and crises. Carl Jung referred to this unseen dimension as the shadow, the hidden self that contains the emotions and traits you've exiled. Anger, envy, neediness, vulnerability. Everything that didn't align with the version of you others praised. You learned early what was acceptable and buried the rest. But repression doesn't erase, it transforms. What's denied seeps out as passive-aggressive behavior, emotional numbness, or sudden anger that feels out of nowhere. You dream of drowning, of being chased, of losing teeth, all metaphors for the same truth. Something buried is struggling to surface. Neuroscience supports this. Repressed memories still activate the amygdala, the brain's emotional warning system. They remain wired into your brain like ghosts, silent until triggered. That's why a scent, a voice, or a single phrase can suddenly unravel you. You believe you're reacting to the present, but your mind is reliving the past. The subconscious can't tell memory from reality. It only knows how to protect you. So when you avoid confronting pain, that pain finds its own way to reach you, through unexplained anxiety, through relationships that reflect your deepest fears, through the haunting sense that you're living the same story with different characters. The subconscious becomes a locked basement filled with noise. Every door you bolt shakes in the dark until it's opened. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow isn't evil. It's truth that's been forgotten. It turns destructive only when neglected. Facing it requires courage to go inward, to meet the parts of yourself you've denied. Because when you stop fleeing from the dark, you discover it was never chasing you. It was guiding you home. In that descent, you begin to see how even your darkness was working to make you whole again. But here's a deeper question. Are your thoughts truly your own? The shows you watch, the words you use, the goals you chase, how much of that is genuine choice and how much is programmed by a world that never stops talking? Your subconscious doesn't exist in isolation. It absorbs everything around it. Every billboard, headline, or viral phrase slips quietly into your mind, reshaping your inner world through repetition. You think you're choosing, but often you're remembering what society taught you to desire. Since childhood, you've had invisible teachers. Television defined beauty. Religion instilled guilt. Language dictated what emotions were acceptable. Meaning was handed to you long before you could define it yourself. Cognitive science tells us the human brain craves patterns. It learns through imitation and repetition. So when society repeats a symbol long enough, the cross, the dollar sign, the flawless face, it becomes sacred to the subconscious, no longer questioned, only obeyed. You end up chasing not authenticity, but belonging. Advertising mastered this truth better than philosophy ever could. It doesn't sell products, it sells identity. A car becomes status. A brand becomes validation. The subconscious, wired for emotion, absorbs these symbols until desire itself feels natural, almost instinctive. The mind is conditioned to believe that ownership brings peace. You buy things not purely out of desire, but because society has taught you that wanting is proof of being alive. Then there are the beliefs we inherit, old fears carried across generations. The fear of rejection, of being different, of challenging authority. These fears echo through the crowd, binding people into a shared illusion. Psychologists refer to this as the collective unconscious, the shared patterns of thought and emotion that move silently through humanity. You can see it everywhere, in politics, religion, and social movements. Entire groups act not from logic but from emotion, mirroring each other like synchronized reflections. Belonging to this trance feels safe because to the social mind, isolation feels like death. Even language becomes a prison. The words you have determine what you can think, express, and even feel. A culture obsessed with productivity creates people who apologize for resting. A society built on competition teaches you to measure your worth through the eyes of others. Gradually, your subconscious trades authenticity for approval and calls it virtue. But true awakening doesn't come from resistance. It begins with awareness. To awaken is not to fight the illusion, but to notice it. To understand that the voices shaping your mind were never meant to harm you, only to protect you within the familiar. Yet safety is not freedom. Only when you see the trance clearly can you ask the question every controlling system fears. What if I stopped obeying? Eventually, a moment arrives when everything seems right from the outside, the job, the relationship, the steady rhythm of daily success. Yet something inside feels quietly off. You move through the day like an actor who's forgotten the reason for the play. The applause still comes, but it no longer matters. Beneath the noise of achievement, a quiet hum persists, a soft, unrelenting question. Why does all this still feel empty? When you lose touch with your subconscious, you become a stranger to yourself. You keep doing, achieving, proving, but without emotional connection, every victory feels hollow. Neuroscience calls it emotional dissonance, the gap between what you present and what you feel. You smile while your body is in distress. You say yes while your entire being says no. This internal divide creates a kind of spiritual paralysis. You function, but you no longer feel alive. You've seen it before. The executive checking emails past midnight while his heart races for no reason. The woman who keeps falling in love with the same kind of emptiness. A face, a voice, a promise that always fades. The creator who never stops producing, yet can't bear to be alone with their own work. Each carries the same quiet wound, a life centered on performance instead of presence. When the subconscious, that silent keeper of truth, is ignored or buried, the conscious mind rushes to fill the gap. It becomes restless, compensating with noise and endless activity. Psychologists call this fragmentation, the self split in two, one part that feels and another that pretends not to. Over time, this divide breeds anxiety, burnout, and emotional numbness. The brain, trapped in survival mode, forgets how to rest. You start mistaking tension for passion, exhaustion for purpose. Even love turns mechanical, gestures without intimacy, words without meaning. The subconscious tries to reach you through dreams, repeated mistakes, and relationships that collapse in familiar ways. But you label them as bad luck, never recognizing them as signals for healing. Then one quiet night, when the world stops asking things of you, the illusion breaks. You feel that hidden ache beneath the noise and the truth you've buried under busyness. You realize you've mistaken stillness for weakness, numbness for strength, and mere survival for peace. This is the true cost of disconnection. Spending years building a life that impresses everyone except the person living it. We call it adulthood, yet it's often just adaptation. We call it maturity, but it's really exhaustion in disguise. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeking wholeness and started chasing approval, forgetting what it means to belong to yourself. But that awareness marks the beginning of a return. Eventually, the war within becomes too heavy to continue. You realize the mind you've been fighting isn't your enemy. It's the abandoned child waiting in the dark, wanting to be seen. The subconscious doesn't respond to force. It responds to attention. Healing begins not when you demand change, but when you start listening to what it's been saying all along. You begin small. You sit quietly one morning. Instead of fleeing into distraction, you let your thoughts come, scattered, strange, unfiltered. The worries and memories you thought were gone rise again, like sediment stirred from still water. You breathe, you stay. This is mindfulness, not the curated version from wellness apps, but the raw practice of witnessing your chaos without running away. Neuroscience shows that when you observe your thoughts without judgment, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, starts to calm. Awareness itself becomes medicine. At night, dreams return, a locked door, a forgotten friend, a voice calling your name, each one a message from the subconscious. In psychology, this is called integration, uniting the conscious and unconscious so your inner world no longer feels divided. You start speaking to your younger self, the one who hid her anger, who mistook fear for obedience. At first it feels strange, almost childish, but something softens, as if an ancient truth recognizes itself again. Working with the subconscious isn't about fixing what's broken, but remembering what's been silenced. You rebuild your beliefs through quiet rituals, not with forced positivity, but with gentle honesty. I'm allowed to rest. I can be loved without performing. Slowly, these phrases begin to feel real. Neural pathways shaped by trauma start to rewrite themselves through safety and repetition. Healing, neuroscience reminds us, isn't a single revelation. It's a process of repatterning, and one day, you stop trying to descend into your subconscious and simply allow yourself to dive. The deeper you go, the lighter you feel. What once seemed like drowning starts to feel like returning to the self beneath the noise, the quiet intelligence of your own psyche. The subconscious stops being a monster in the basement and becomes a collaborator, a pulse guiding you toward wholeness. The goal was never to silence your inner depths, but to hear them clearly enough to rise, not as the version that merely survived, but as the one who remembers why. What if what you've been searching for has been looking through your own eyes all along? The subconscious isn't buried beneath you. It lives within you, woven into every breath, hesitation, and choice you can't explain. It's the ocean beneath your ship, the night that makes the stars visible. You've spent your life trying to conquer it, label it, rise above it, not realizing that without it, you wouldn't exist at all. Close your eyes for a moment. Listen to the rhythm beneath your thoughts, that faint pulse of something ancient and alive. That's not noise. That's memory. Every kindness, every wound, every silence you've endured lives there, echoing through the corridors of your mind. Freud called it the unconscious. Jung called it the shadow. Both were describing the same thing, the hidden architecture of being human. It's neither evil nor divine, but something more mysterious, the mirror of all you've forgotten about yourself. As Alan Watts said, we are the universe looking back at itself, consciousness folded into form. When you meet your subconscious, you're not descending into darkness and you're returning to your source. Each dream, each impulse, each flicker of intuition is your deeper self speaking in the language of emotion and symbol. Science can scan your brain, map its synapses, even predict your decisions. But it can't locate where fear turns into metaphor, or where love remembers its first shape. That's the space where psychology meets the soul, the mystery that makes us human. You've spent years trying to control life, to outthink pain, to stay above what you couldn't name, but maybe control was never the point. Maybe awareness is, the subconscious doesn't need to be conquered, it needs to be heard. When you stop fighting it, you start to see it for what it truly is, a mirror reflecting not who you pretend to be, but who you've always been beneath the noise. You realize the mind isn't divided into light and dark. It's a rhythm, like day becoming night, like tides that recede only to return. And perhaps that's the greatest secret of all. The mind's deepest mystery isn't what it hides. It's that it keeps dreaming of becoming whole. Each thought, each emotion, each mistake is your psyche's way of remembering itself. The subconscious isn't your shadow. It's your map home. So next time you find yourself lost in thought, haunted by what you don't understand, pause. Don't run. Look into that quiet, infinite mirror within. What you'll see there isn't the stranger you feared, but the self that's been waiting patiently for you to return.